Alright guys, so the only reason the car's on jacks right now is to turn it to top dead center by turning the crank pulley. Alright, so I gotta find top dead center on piston 1, because when it's at top dead center, then there won't be pressure on the cam that I need to loosen. So then when I loosen it, the springs don't push on it too hard. There should be a little bit of pressure either way, but as long as the cam lobes aren't pressing on it, it'll allow me to be able to pull the cam out so I can snake the cam tensioner out. Alright, so here I'm just getting the clips off of the coils, getting them out of the way, and unscrewing some of the hose clamps that they have on these hard vacuum lines so that I can get it out of the way. Just doing some cleaning as I pull things out, clean each coil, so then when I put it back in, everything's nice and clean. If you've watched any of my videos or anything like that, you've probably noticed that I'm a clean freak. I overly clean things, probably more than I should, but it's just the way I like to do things. So I've already gotten all the 10mm bolts loose now on the valve cover, and then once these hard lines are out of the way, I'll be able to just pop the valve cover right off. There's also a plastic timing belt cover on the front that just has 2 clips on the top. Now you don't have to take the whole thing off. I just unclip the top so I can pull it out of the way, so when I go to take the valve cover off, I can, because it clips directly to the valve cover. Alright, so now that I got this out of the way, the only other thing that needs to come out is the wastegate that sits right next to the tensioner. It's the same size bit as the retainers for the cam. Right now I didn't notice it until I actually was ready to take the tensioner out, and then I eventually take it out. So just giving you a heads up while you're getting everything out of the way, it's probably smart to just get that out of the way too. Now I'm just going around and I'm cracking all of the retainers loose. I'm not taking them all the way out, just enough to know that they're loose. And then once they're all cracked loose, I can just go use my gun and pull them right out real quick. Next is this cover for the cam sensor. It's just 2 10mm bolts, but use an open-ended wrench because it's kind of a tight spot to get into. I just left the electrical harness on. So everything is broken loose. I'm gonna start at this end. Now when I broke it loose, I alternated. I started with this one, and then I went here. And on each one, I didn't start with one side, I diagonal. Anytime you're doing something like this, you wanna make sure that even when you're loosening stuff, that you do it properly. Things like this, you could really throw out of whack if you, say, tighten this bolt all the way down and then put the other 3 in and tighten them down. You really gotta make sure that everything gets seated properly and is flat as possible. Now, metal is very hard, but it's when you're tightening bolts through it, especially like aluminum and things like that, it can twist, and you won't notice it. It'll look normal, but it'll be very, very tweaked. So these 4 bolts, this is a little tight on there because it has gasket maker, like the gasket stuff. So once you get the bolts off, it's really tight. I just used a rubber mallet and kind of tapped it a little bit and broke it loose. I was trying to avoid any sort of prying or marring on this, because this is your valve cover seat, and you don't want to gouge that up. Now if you want to go ahead and clean it, I would suggest like a green scrubby pad and clean it up real nice. Now when everything goes back together, I will hit it with some new gasket sealer but before that I will make sure it's nice and clean. Alright, so I'm just going to kind of basically recap what I had to do real quick. So after I loosened all these and I loosened the tensioner, it was free, but this one on the retainer on the end was actually blocking the tensioner from sliding out. There was just not enough room, and I also didn't want to damage anything, so I just popped the end cap off. I loosened all these just to give it a little bit more play, and then it came right out. I made sure I marked everything so that when everything goes back in, it's exactly the same, like nothing changed. Alright, so I'm going to take the cam out so I can actually get the tensioner in, and then I'll line up the tooth exactly where I marked the chain, where I made the mark on the tooth and the chain. I'll line them up perfectly, and then I'll slide it in. I line that up first so I can compensate for the slack in the chain. Alright, so everything's back in. I got everything lined up exactly the way it was. The only thing different is this is holding the chain down so it's not super tight. And once I get everything locked down, then I will release this. Alright, so now that everything is locked down, I still have this on. Make sure that this, if you're doing this job, this needs to come off before everything else. Before you're completely done and put the valve cover on. I just wanted to make sure that there was no added tension on the cam from the chain pulling it in a direction so that the cam could sit down in the proper seat. And I could lock these all down, and then I'll release this because there's still, you know, now there's a little more tension because it's completely locked in place to where it should be. But yeah, I didn't want anything negatively affecting where the seat was, so I wanted to make sure that this was on there and that the chain was not pulling the cam in this direction when I sat it down. So now everything is torqued down nice and evenly. This front gurney is locked down. Now I'm putting on the sensor for the cam, and you know, basically everything is all set. After I get this locked down, I'm gonna get the valve cover gasket on with some RTV silicone in the corners and in any spots that I think may leak, and we'll get that locked back down, and then we're all done. Basically, we just got to hook back up the vacuum lines, and that's it. But I hope you guys got some good value out of this, because every video that I seen was only taking it apart. It wasn't putting it back together. And in my opinion, taking it apart is the easy part. You know, it's paying attention while you take it apart and knowing where everything goes back. And putting it back together is where the value in a video to me is, because if you just take it apart, you're not dealing with torque specs, you're not dealing with lining these up or any of that. So in my videos, I'm gonna make sure that you guys get everything that you need in order to do the job from start to finish. And that way you feel more confident in doing the job.
I got myself the tip ready just because it's going to be easier to have a nice somewhat pointed tip. I wanted to make it more pointy, but it wasn't allowing it to. This stuff is on the thick side, so it was so hard to squeeze with the end smaller, so I just made it a little bigger just so I can have a little more accuracy with where I'm putting it. And the majority is corners and areas that you think may have potential to work. Alright, so I got the valve cover back on now. I'm gonna get the 3 center bolts in and get it to seat. And then I'll go around the edge and get them nice and locked in. Then I'm gonna double check everything, get the vacuum lines hooked up, and then I'm done. And the cam chain tensioner is complete. Alright guys, so there you have it. The valve cover is back on, everything's tightened down. Now, if you guys got anything out of the content, be sure to hit that like button and show your support. You know, if cars and things like that and watching builds like this are things that interest you, then you know, be sure to subscribe, because I got tons more to come. And the more support from you guys, the more videos I can do and the better content that I can provide. So also be sure that if I miss something and you need to know because you're doing the job, don't be afraid to ask. I'm pretty sure that I'm gonna cover everything that you're gonna have to do, everything you're gonna need to know in this video. But like I said, don't be afraid to ask. With that said, guys, until next time, peace.